From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts, the podcast that examines the qualities of community leadership and the many paths and forms it can take. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. I am beyond thrilled to welcome today's guest, someone I've known and admired for more than 20 years. Kimber Lanning is the founder and CEO of Local First Arizona, a visionary organization dedicated to fostering a thriving and diverse economy across Arizona's rural, tribal, suburban, and urban communities. Based in Phoenix, Kimber has been an unstoppable force behind efforts to build resilient local economies and champion sustainable growth throughout the state. As an entrepreneur, business leader, and community development specialist, her vision and impact have been instrumental in shaping vibrant communities, and I couldn't be more excited to sit with her and explore her remarkable journey. I have known Kimber since the start of her journey with Local First Arizona, and it's been incredible to watch her drive the organization's remarkable impact. What began as a small initiative has grown into a powerhouse of people, programs, and progress. She is quite simply one of the most interesting, inspiring, and intelligent leaders I know, and I am thrilled and honored to have her as my guest on Community Catalysts. Welcome, Kimber Lanning.
Wow, Matt, thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm happy to be here with you.
We've known each other for a long time, but you and I actually haven't had a conversation together in quite some time, so it's long overdue.
It's long overdue. I'm looking forward to it.
So, Kimber, officially, you're the CEO of Local First Arizona. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, right? 501c3?
Yeah, and we also have a 501c6. We have both.
Okay. And I think it's fair to say that anyone who knows you sees you as also this visionary champion of the movement to empower people from all walks of life to engage in and contribute to this thriving, dynamic economy. So the first thing I want to ask you, in your own words, what's the vision behind Local First Arizona? What are you working to achieve?
Well, I hope that at a very basic level, I want for Arizonans to have an opportunity to build the lives that they want. And that can mean a lot of different things to different people. A lot of people say, well, sure, opportunity, it's everywhere, but it isn't, right? So part of what we are doing is not only uplifting communities, but also removing barriers. And there's systemic barriers that hold folks back. So those can be, folks who grow up in households that don't have a language around growth or economic mobility, that don't know how to access capital. They may have language barriers. There's a wide variety of barriers. And our goal at Local First is to bring everyone into a place where they have opportunity to build the lives that they want. I also think that everybody has something to contribute. And it's really important to shine a light on what it is that they're contributing.
Kimber, like I said, we've known each other for 20 years since you started Local First Arizona. Is your ability to express that vision, do you think that's the same as what it was 10 years ago or even 20 years ago when you founded? How has the vision changed over the course of time?
When we started, the vision that I had was a reaction to a lot of corporate dominance that was occurring. Again, this 2002, 2003, we were known as a chain mecca, and we were losing. You and I've had this conversation before. We were losing so many of our bright young people because they said this place had no culture, it had no soul. And I really thought, yes, it does. You're just not looking for it, right? And so at that point in time, our municipalities were giving away massive subsidies to chain retailers. And I'm talking like $68 million to Cabela's out in the West Valley. Walmarts were averaging $35 million per store. And I just wanted a level playing field. My background is a small business owner. I just wanted a level playing field so that our small independent businesses could compete. And I also wanted our rightful place at the table because small local businesses create culture and weave the fabric in our communities that make it unique and build that hometown pride. So what happened was I got into that work and I started talking about buy local and eat local. And it wasn't until after we were already moving that I realized how many people have no choice to buy something local because their communities have already been gutted. They don't have a choice to buy local food. They're doing good to have a Circle K that they can walk to. And I realized it was foolish to really just talk about buying local or eating local in a world where that's not a reality for so many people. In fact, it really showed my privilege. And the organization that I built in the first probably 8 years was a bunch of people who looked just like me. And it's important to note, I think it's especially important for white people who do have privilege to acknowledge their growth. And so that evolution of local first was my personal evolution, that if we're going to tell people to eat local, we have to solve for food security issues. And that's a massive systemic issue. And that's why we're working with Arizona agriculture today. We're working with food producers to create infrastructure for local food distribution. And I could go on and on and on, but it's sort of like peeling the layers of the onion to get at those root systemic causes before we can create a healthy local economy.
Kimber, was there a moment or an experience or something that was the actual pivot point where you went from the moment of saying, this is about people's choices to work with local business, to this is about addressing the systems by which those services are available?
There absolutely was. And I was standing in front of a room of Spanish speakers. My Spanish is only so-so. So my friend Carlos was translating for me. And I was talking about how important it would be to support locally owned businesses. Now, at this time, I had all my data. 85% of Latina expenditures were going to Walmart. And I was there with the sole purpose to convince them to change the way they were spending their money. And they were smiling and they were nodding and they weren't really, it wasn't resonating. And so in the moment afterward, I was debriefing with Carlos. Why do you think it just didn't land? And we're talking about it. And this was about the time that Joe Arpaio was raining terror on this population. And here's this lady standing in the front of the room saying, if you buy locally, it will be better for the state's economy. Now, do you think that group of people gave a damn about Arizona's economy? And when it hit me, Matt, it was like a wave of realization all in a moment that almost knocked me down. And I went home and I stared at the ceiling for what seemed to be days, because I just spent 8 years of my life working on something that actually was so thin that it would never, ever begin to transform Arizona. And I knew I had to rebuild it.
I'm curious. So you had this dawning, but you also had a board of directors that you had to share this news with and help them have the revelation as well. How did that go?
So I was lucky. By that time, I had a board that really understood. And I will say it was a slow burn. It wasn't like I walked in and had all of the answers. I only walked in and had all the concerns, and it was a slow burn in figuring out. You know, it's been 6 or 8 years of rolling out programs and being able to speak truth to power and coming back to how are we centering the people that we are trying to focus on and uplift, and also digging to the depths of systemic bias and really trying to get at core issues. So it wasn't as if, the board was dealing with, I'm pivoting this whole organization. I mean, to this day, we still have a membership organization and we do still talk about buying locally. That's core. It is important that we empower ourselves and understand that where our money goes when we spend it is more important than how we make our decisions. Or, people are trained to think, I need to save at every turn, but that cheap is really costing us a fortune, and helping people understand that. So I guess I would just say it was this slow burn. It wasn't like a shock, but my early boards would have rejected it entirely. We had early boards that thought this is all just about shopping. And luckily, I had some big picture thinkers at the time that we began to pivot in 2013.
If I'm looking for a summary of this, is the way of expressing this that you went from being an organization about economic choice, and it turned into an organization about social justice?
I think that's fair, but I don't know if I would call it social justice as much as I would call it economic justice. So economic choice of, people having the choice of how to spend their money, which then in turn empowers them and their children and families, to an organization that is around economic justice that not only enables them to see that, but enables them to act on it.
So Kimber, I'm going to ask you to put back on the hat of being CEO of the organization. How does this vision convert to concrete objectives? Like, what are the specific measures of achievement that matter to you?
Measures of achievement include a variety of things, such as the number of people that we connect to financial resources and financial power. So every single one of the business accelerator programs that we run that are focused and targeted on people from the lower quadrant of income levels, we require them to establish checking accounts with community banks or credit unions so that they can actually have a relationship with that entity's leadership. We help them with Credit Builder. We get them out of predatory loans. We provide them with matching grants to send them on their way. We provide technical assistance along their journey and path. So that is all ways that we connect them to financial resources and power. And that's dealing with a real systemic issue. The financial sector, I think, is more guilty than almost any other system or sector of exclusionary practices. So another example would be around food security, access to food, or how do we measure the number of small and mid-sized farms that are actually profitable, keeping that food system close to home. One of our measurables is the number of businesses that we help reduce their carbon footprint, whether it be reducing energy or water usage, whatever, reducing transportation costs. So those are the types of measurables. We are helping small businesses in every one of those examples I just gave you, but we never lose sight of the systemic framework in which those businesses are operating within.
Do you have a sense of what degree of penetration you have into the market? You say you can track the number of people, but are you at 10% or 50%? How do you know, if you're making a sizable impact in the community?
In certain programmatic areas, food system is very difficult to measure. Financial, we know that through our Move Your Money campaign, we have shifted 11% market share out of the 3 biggest global banks operating here in Arizona into community banks and credit unions. And that 11% is a mighty big number. And we did that in 8 years.
Why is the 11% so mighty? What makes it so?
Well, when we started at Local First, we had 96% of our total deposits in Arizona. That's consumer banking, business banking, government banking. 96% of that money was deposited in non-local banks. So just 4% of our money we had control over. It's important to think about it like this. North Dakota has their own bank. So everybody in North Dakota pays their taxes and it goes into the North Dakota bank, and the North Dakota people get to decide how that money gets distributed. They've decided to invest in education. Here, we pay all of our taxes and the state of Arizona deposits our money into Bank of America, and Bank of America then in turn gets to decide who among us is worthy of a loan, which to them is, where is the profit, right? We don't have any say over how our own money is reinvested once it's in that bank. So it's critically important to think of it that way. It's about local control.
I want to take you back in your career a little bit. You just shared the revelation you had 8 years in about transforming Local First, but I want to go even deeper back. I looked at your official bio, Kimber. It says, and I'm going to quote, it says that you're passionate about fostering cultural diversity and inclusion, economic resilience, and responsible growth for Arizona. So I want to go back to the creation of Local First in the first place. Was there some specific moment or experience, some epiphany, some crisis where you bitten by a radioactive spider? What turned you into a cause leader?
There were two things. One is having a record store. So the music industry is just a glowing example of bias toward the big companies. So the Warner Brothers and the Sony records dominate over the little independent labels, and they form sweetheart deals with the Best Buys and the Walmarts of the world. And so part of it was just learning the ropes of my own survival. I've had my record store for 37 years. So that was kind of one of the things. The other is being in the arts, watching so many of my favorite young customers, bright kids, they all left. And that was painful to me. I'm competitive, right? I wanted them to stay in Arizona and build great careers here. And so I've had enough of this. And I don't want these bright young kids to leave anymore. I want to build a better community.
Do you have a sense at this point that the tide has turned on that? Do you feel like the high school and college students are now saying this is a cool place to be?
Absolutely. I mean, we have PHX tattoos, Matt. I mean, people are wearing Arizona-shaped necklaces and earrings, and, they made the saguaro cactus cool again. Yeah, I mean, I think it's night and day from where it was 20 years ago.
You told me as we were preparing to get together today that you had a pivotal experience in an early pivotal experience in your journey to leadership. What happened that got you into business in the first place?
Sure. So my journey, I grew up in Glendale. I graduated from high school early with a plan to move out. And my mom panicked at the last minute and said, I'm not ready for you to move out. I wasn't yet 18. So I stayed behind. I might have ended up one of those kids in New York, but I didn't. I stayed behind. I stayed here, and I went to ASU for a couple of years, and I just did not like it. And I was unhappy there. I was working at Zia Records at the time. And I was passed over several times for promotion. And I went home at the holidays and said, I think I want to own my own store. I'm going to open my own store. That was in December of 1986. And I opened my doors in May of 1987. I was 19 years old. And my mom gave me a lot of tough love. She said, finish this semester strong. Don't blow it right now, because you might not want to pick up your college later, which I did. And I was grateful to her. And in terms of running business, my mom's tough as nails, and she ran her business for 45 years. She said, Kimber, if you fail, it's because you're too nice. And if you fail, you can never come back here. And what she meant by that was there's no safety net here. So if you're going to do this, you better be damn sure that you can do this. And she didn't mean never show your face on my door, but just don't come back here and ask me for money to bail you out. This is all on you. And I appreciate that tough love, and that's really who shaped me. And I think it made me damn sure. Here I am, 37 years later, I made it.
That lack of safety net, that's kind of powered you ever since?
Oh, I think so. I think it absolutely has shaped who I am and the decisions I make. I just keep upping the ante. I mean, now I have 65, 67 staff, and Stinkweeds is motoring along with 5 staff, and you know what I mean? It's the responsibility just continues to broaden.
So let's be clear. Stinkweeds is the record store. You also mentioned the art gallery. You want to name that too?
Sure. Modified Arts is on 4th Street in Roosevelt, and I have the honor of being really, one of the first folks that decided that on like I said, a blighted and forgotten stretch, that there should be an art gallery and performance space there. And
now Roosevelt Row is, it's unrecognizable. It's so full of development.
I'm always amazed that young people, they don't really have a sense of how things came to be, or that it wasn't always like this, right? A lot of people think that it was always an arts district. I mean, there wasn't even a light rail stop, supposedly, on the original plans for the light rail. It was just going to fly right by Roosevelt, because there was no there, literally. There was a hubcap shop and a liquor store. Technically, that was what was there.
I want to go back and ask you about these dual responsibilities of leading a structured nonprofit organization, but also being the driver of a broad transformative movement. Do those roles for you, do they ever conflict? How do you balance them?
Oh, they conflict almost on a daily basis. So I am more of an entrepreneur than I am sort of the leader of of a nonprofit organization. I am a CEO and I run it, but my natural tendency is much more from my arts creative brain on the entrepreneurial side. So the conflict comes in when we're trying to build the infrastructure. If you run a nonprofit, you might relate to the fact that we're trying to build sturdier legs to hold up the weight of the table, which is our programmatic area. And that stuff doesn't come naturally to me. It's not interesting to me. I have to slog through it. It's like preparing for a calculus exam. It just, half the time I heat flash because I'm so annoyed with the structure and the process. My creative brain wants to swoop in and make it all go away. But if you want to get me going and talking about innovation, how to fix problems, how to build something, that's my sweet spot. So I look at those two things as very much in conflict, and they happen to me nearly daily.
Is that a challenge between being idealistic and being pragmatic, that you have the vision, but the mechanics to get there? Because it seems to me you are very pragmatic and you are very driven and very goal-oriented as well. It doesn't surprise me that both of these things coexist, but looking at you from the outside, these things seem to blend together really well.
I appreciate that. And I think I've learned it. And my practical brain says, in the time it took me to enter all these steps, I could have just done it. I'm just not the kind of person that wants to take that much time to lay out a process. And yet Local First would not, let me be clear, would not be where it is today if we did not have not only the processes, but the adherence to the processes.
So walk us through that a little bit. Tell us about the growth of Local First, the budget size, the employees, the scope of services. Like, where have you been and where are you today?
Well, I think I'm going to preface this by saying I am all about honesty and transparency. And the reason I am is because I want everybody to see in themselves that they might have an opportunity to do this as well. So I'm just going to tell you, there's some very funny stories, bumps and bruises along the way. One example would be, I think I had 11 employees when, I had contracted out my HR. And my HR lady called and said, well, it's time for me to come by and review your employee files. And I said, well, something in what you said would indicate to me that you think that I have employee files. And she was like, what? And I was like, well, you're my HR person. Aren't you supposed to tell me these things? So that would be an example of the bumps and bruises along the way. And you have to bring your sense of humor. I think I'm just going to get philosophical for a minute. I think that our colleges are turning out people who don't know how to make mistakes. And they just don't know how to make mistakes and recover from them. So, and what I mean by that, they think there's a right and wrong answer and you got it wrong and like it's the end of the world. And I think part of being an entrepreneur is to be laughing at that. It's like, well, don't freak out. We'll get your employee files. Just hold on a minute. And you have to explain to me what that means, because I've never created employee files in my entire life. And just having that vulnerability of keeping your sense of humor and saying, well, I messed that up and let's figure out how to get over this hump. So imagine that happened quite a few times. We went into COVID with 23 staff. We came out of COVID with 56 staff.
Went from 23 to 56 staff over the course of 2 years during COVID.
Yeah, transformational, and so many things change. And for the staff that I have today that have been with me, longer than 5 years, God bless them, because they went through a lot of transformation at work. And they are bought into the mission, and they're the people you want to be in the trenches with, because they had to deal with, wait, now we're doing it this way. And wait, now the CFO wants what? We never had a CFO. You know what I mean? It's just been a wild journey. And so bless them for sticking with you.
Kimber, stop on that point for a second. What happened during COVID that turned into an opportunity for Local First Arizona? What materialized there?
Well, it was interesting because when COVID first hit in those first few months, I had no idea where it was going to land. And so I was preparing for the worst. And then I just kept my eyes and ears open for opportunity. And those opportunities just opened door after door after door. So the first one was the governor called and said, I know you're the State Rural Development Council. I have $5 million. I want to save small businesses. Can you help us put together a plan to distribute that? So that looks like putting together a detailed application process and, interview qualifiers and everything that goes along with that. And $5 million in $25,000 increments is no joke. And I thought about it. I took a deep breath. This is all in one phone call. And I said, yes, sir, we can do that. They called back the next day and said they like that idea so much they're going to give you 10 million. And I almost just fell down and like, oh my gosh, can we do? But I'm never let them see you sweat. So Matt, that 10 million, not from the state, but once we were doing it, we had philanthropy step in. We had cities, towns, counties. I mean, tiny little superiors said, we have 100,000. Can you help our small businesses? And we kept putting everyone through the legally approved process that we created. And in the end, we distributed $52 million in small business relief aid. So that was the turning point. The second thing was that I had the wherewithal to realize as the federal government in late 2021 started, actually mid 2021, started announcing all these new grants that were going to be coming out that were designed for cities, towns, tribes, nonprofits. And I looked around because we work statewide, and I thought our communities, many of them are not going to be prepared to be competitive for these dollars. So we created the Arizona Economic Resource Center. And this is, Matt, this is a pivotal moment at Local First. I got the idea. We're going to contract with grant writers and deploy them to help increase capacity for cities, towns, and tribes to help them win more federal and foundation grants. And I created a slide deck explaining what I wanted to do. And I was able to raise $800,000 with nothing but a slide deck and an idea. And that was transformative for me. Because as you grow from record store lady to a CEO, sometimes you still see yourself as record store lady. And I couldn't raise $50 in the first 6 years of Local First Arizona. Our first $10,000 grant was like beams of light from the sky. And now I can raise $800,000 with a slide deck. And I realized you're not in Kansas anymore. Like this, you're in a whole other level, and you better start acting like it. And so those are the kinds of things that may go on in your head when you're suddenly, I mean, I literally got dizzy. I just raised $800,000 in 10 days because people knew we could do it, because it was about relationships and it was a sound idea. And Matt, we today we're going to pass $95 million in wins for our cities, towns, and tribes that they would not have had otherwise. So we're running about a 200x ROI on those initial investments.
Tell me some lessons you've learned about what it takes to scale an organization like Local First.
You got to be flexible. Absolutely have to be flexible, because where you're going and where you came from will almost not be recognizable. So that flexibility, you've got to have courage to be dropped off of 100-foot cliff and not know how you're going to land, and just trust that you're going to figure it out on the way down. And then you also have to be very comfortable with the not knowing. And I think a lot of people, we force ourselves to believe that we can control the outcomes, and we just simply can't. And so I'm really comfortable with ambiguity and not knowing and feeling my way through things. And I give all the credit to my arts background for that part of my leadership style.
So Kimber, the purpose of this podcast is to learn from different leaders by hearing examples of the good, the bad, the ugly on their journey to leadership. And I want to ask if there's a story or a lesson you might talk about. I think it's somewhere in here. Early in your work, I know you mentioned earlier, you had your hands full working to overhaul the city of Phoenix's adaptive reuse program. And I wonder if you could revisit that for us just a little bit. Take us through some of the experience and tell us what you experienced, good, bad, and ugly, and what you took from that experience, what lessons you learned from that.
Sure. Mayor Gordon at the time, I was knocking on the city's door on behalf of small businesses that were hung up in the process to get their doors open. And I kept knocking on the door and saying, why are we doing it this way? And finally, he appointed me to the Development Advisory Board. And of course, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I said, yeah, I'll be on the Development Advisory Board. So I went in, and these meetings are in the council chambers, and everybody there is an expert from their field, whether it be the fire department or engineers or, and it was like, who let her in here? And I was the small business representative. And so luckily, when I was in college, I studied architecture, and my brother is an architect and a builder. And so I have a clue about how things are put together. And as a small business owner, I had navigated the city. So, I started getting their lingo and picking, I know for a record store lady, I know more about building code than you would ever suspect. But what I found is that people didn't care about old buildings, and they certainly didn't care about small, locally owned businesses. Even our city manager would look out over the city and say, tear it all down. We ought to blade the whole neighborhood. Where I saw gems, they saw trash. And so trying to convince them, it took and I see this on a regular basis. People try to make their case measured using language measured by what's important to themselves. You have to use language based on what's important to the person you're trying to convince. So I started talking to them about the economics. And I was so grateful when the National Historic Preservation Trust came out with a study called Older, Smaller, Better. And this was years later, mind you, but it really underscored that cities and towns that protected their older building stock were faring better on real estate performance, youth retention, small business, economic impact. All of that stuff was what I was talking about when there was no study, it was like, no, if you don't protect those buildings, you are never going to have a 24/7 downtown. Mayor Gordon was always saying, we're going to have a 24. And I was like, you're not going to have a 24/7 downtown because you're tearing down all the buildings that are affordable for the people who are going to make it vibrant. So I learned how to argue. I learned how, I should say, debate. And I worked my way to co-chair of the Development Advisory Board and truly overhauled that program. And what I learned, Matt, was that it's iterative. And too often people aren't patient enough to get it across the finish line. The first programmatic step that we took, we had to go to council with it. It was only in 5 square miles, buildings that were up to 1,200 square feet that were built before 1950. I mean, this small microcosm. And then we measured it. We proved that we saved this much money and this much time. And we went back to the council and we expanded it and we expanded it and expanded. And that is today a citywide program, buildings up to 200,000 square feet and anything built before 1990. It's the most comprehensive adaptive reuse program in the country. But people are too impatient. It started with this little, they only see what it is today. It started with this little tiny example because why? Because you couldn't push them to have that vision without the data and the proof points and the relationship and the trust. And it's iterative. People think they're going to open up a business and it's going to be their perfect vision and it's going to be successful overnight. No, it's going to change. It's going to grow. You're going to fail on. So you're going to saw off a limb of your business because it's not working and rebuild and reinvest over here. It's an iterative process. And everything in the world is like that, especially politics and changing systems and policy that is associated. That's why we can't get anything done with immigration reform because people on both sides, they're trying to eat the elephant. And it's somewhere in between and it has to be iterative. And that means, the left and the right are equally guilty. They want what they want and they're not willing to compromise. Well, guess what? That's how you end up with 25 years of no reforms and the disaster that we're in right now.
I want you to reflect on this for a moment. Again, the listeners to this podcast are by and large municipal leaders, mayors and council members and city managers, and also school board members and county officials as well. There's a part of the municipal mindset that is about stability and long-term planning. But when you say iterative, what I'm hearing you say is no. In the world of business, in the world of humans, we need to try and fail and try again and fail and learn from these experiences and continue to grow. What do you say? What have you learned to say to municipal leaders who just want to make one decision that's going to last for the next 10 or 20 years and be done with it? And you want to say, no, we need to create an environment where people can learn, where infill can happen more organically.
You call it a pilot. That is the secret key word to getting anything done, is you call it a pilot program. I will leave you alone, Mr. City Manager, if you will just let me try this pilot program. And they will generally try it if it's framed as a pilot, because it's not something that has to be long-term. They don't have to think about how they're going to budget for it, et cetera, et cetera. And then you try the pilot, and then you work the members of the council and you show them the success of the pilot, and then you gradually grow it into transformative change.
What's your advice to the city manager? What would you tell them that they should do when the next Kimber Lanning or the next person in their community comes to them and says, I have an idea of something that could be helpful?
Well, I think you take the time and you consider its merits, and you be willing to try a pilot. No doubt that some really great ideas come from people who are most impacted by the challenge. So if you continue to dismiss it, I'll tell you, the loudest squeaky wheel that's complaining about that issue, you can guarantee yourself that there's many other people that are saying this system doesn't work for the constituents of this city. And so listen, if there are ideas that are worth exploring, listen and be willing to give it a try. And for those of you that might be listening that are trying to make change, you have got to show up, particularly for city staff that goes out on a limb and takes a risk. Be there for them, to shelter them from an angry elected official that's trying to hold them up as an example. We shouldn't have done this, or we shouldn't. I showed up for so many people. I elevated people. When the New York Times called, I gave the microphone to the guy at the back desk who never got the media attention ever, but who took a risk. I gave the mic to that person because I wanted them to feel they were part of the solution. That when they're a little old person, they're going to look back on their life and they're going to think, remember that time I changed a city?
It seems like if someone is a city manager or serving in a elected position, it's really easy to hear someone and dismiss them and send them on their way, because I imagine leaders receive a lot of inquiries, they receive a lot of ideas. I think what I'm hearing you say is it's a real act of courage, and it's a real responsibility for a municipal leader, elected or appointed or hired, to be able to actually say to someone, how can I help you? What can I help you do next? And actually be on the side of the person who approaches them.
Oh, that's so true. I mean, sometimes you have an entrepreneur that can be transforming your city right under your nose, and you really ought to go and sit down with a cup of coffee and say, I can see that you're doing really well. What were some of the bumps that our city caused you along the way? I'll never forget one time, Tempe had a fantastic chef who had a garden that had a chain link fence around it, and he used to grow his own food for this restaurant. And they had some elected officials and some other city officials that were on the outside of the fence. And they were yelling, hey, what can we do to help you? And he goes, you want to help me? He was still so angry about the city. He goes, you want to help me? Stay on that side of the fence. And I thought, it doesn't have to be this way, right? It shouldn't get to that point of hostility. If you have a successful business operating, sit down with them. Ask them, what are the things that we're doing that really upset you? I have a city leader that used to say that to me, and I just cherish that. What am I doing that really pisses you off? That's how he would start the conversation. And I would say, I am so glad that you asked. Let's have a civil conversation about some of these challenges.
You're in a position now where people are seeking you out, but I want to pay respect. A lot of the early years of the work that you were doing, you were knocking on doors, trying to speak truth to power, not being terribly well respected, right?
No, it was a brutal start, but it made me stronger. And it's been enough time now that I can laugh. But for the first 6 years, Local First Arizona was just me. And then for 4 years after that, we were a staff of 3 or 4, and I still was struggling to figure out how to make it work. I mean, Matt, you were there when I think I burned through my first couple of boards. I was on your board trying to figure out how to run a board for myself. And so, yeah, I tell people when they're onboarded at Local First, I tell them that journey. And then I'll stop and I'll say, why do you think I'm standing in front of you at your brand new job as your new CEO, explaining to you all of these challenges? And they usually don't get it right. But I tell them that because I want to prepare them. You're working at a very entrepreneurial organization. We're going to be trying new things. You're going to try new things and you're going to fail. And I want you to know this is a place where we try things and we fail and we learn from them and we move on. And you're not going to trust in that until you can see that that's our background. That's what I've done. And I'm just trying to get them more comfortable because people join our team and they think they have to be perfect. There's no space for perfect. If you're perfect, then you're not trying hard enough.
I have to ask, are there organizations like Local First in every other state? If someone's listening to this, should they be looking in their own state for whoever is doing something similar, or should they be calling you, asking you, how do we do something like this in our state?
You know, there's great organizations out there, but I have yet to find one that is comprehensive in its approach to creating economic justice that has small local businesses at its core. We are still the largest local business coalition in North America, and you know, it's strength in numbers. We have the ability to have a seat at the table in all of these conversations because so many people are partnered with us.
You've empowered communities across Arizona, rural, tribal, urban centers. And I just wonder, are there any key lessons that you've taken away from leading in such diverse environments? Is there anything here that you would say has informed your approach to leadership that we might take from all of that connection you've had?
Well, what happens is when you're not trying to be leaderly, you end up being the lead. And so what I mean by that is I walk in with a lot of humility. I walk in to listen and learn about people's place because they know their place better than me. And so certainly I can bring in expertise, but my expertise may be completely irrelevant to that place or their context. So you really have to listen. I mean, people, you say that all the time, but I mean, really, I don't think many people hear what I'm saying, but I mean, really, you don't walk in the door with predisposed opinions about what really needs to happen in this community or that community, because I can guarantee you're wrong. Listen and learn before you try to make recommendations, and make sure that you're invited into this space before you make recommendations. Sometimes people don't really care what you think, and that's fine. So really listen and don't walk in all leaderly.
Kimber, we're at the point of the conversation where I'm going to ask you some lightning round questions that I challenge you to answer in one sentence or less. You ready to play?
Sure.
Kimber Lanning, describe your leadership style in 3 words.
Relentless, humble, compassionate.
Kimber, what's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
Richard de Uriarte, who just recently passed away, convinced me not to run for office because he thought I could achieve more outside of office. And I think he was right.
He was a writer for the Arizona Republic, right?
He was.
Yeah. Kimber, if you were stranded on a desert island and could only bring one album to listen to for the rest of your life, what album would you choose?
A band called Breathless, and it's called Chasing Promises.
If you could instantly gain one skill, what would it be?
Piano.
How do you recharge yourself, especially during challenging times?
Playing music. No doubt about it. I most people don't realize, but I do play the drums, and I still play the drums, and it exercises that part of my brain. It's a physical activity and brightens my day.
It's my next question, because I know that you play drums. If you could play drums and sit in with any band, current or past, to play drums for a session with them, which band would you pick?
I'll just say Long Winters for fun.
That's a band name?
The Long Winters.
Kimber Lanning, what's one small change that local governments could make that would have a big positive impact on small businesses in their communities?
pull their money out of big global banks and partner with community banks that are actually lending money to the small businesses in your community.
Kimber, in the movie version of your life, who plays you?
I'm going to make a funny comment. Tatum O'Neal in The Bad News Bears. She was the pitcher. She was great.
Kimber, if you could send a message to yourself back in time to just before you launched Local First in 2001, what would it say in one sentence?
This will be the hardest and most grueling and most rewarding thing that you could have ever imagined.
Kimber, if you could spend 1 hour in conversation with any leader, past or present, who would you choose and why? You have 2 sentences for that.
When I was saying I'm going to be practical, I'm going to say Mackenzie Scott. And I really have no interest in meeting Mackenzie Scott, but I would like the opportunity to, and this gets to the second sentence, to talk to her and her team about ways they could invest the money she's giving away more strategically to really, really impact economic justice.
Last question for you, Kimber. We live in divisive and challenging times. What makes you optimistic for the future?
What makes me optimistic for the future is that the systems that have been built to advantage the few are showing cracks, and they're not going to last. And I'm excited to see what happens when they fall. I hope I live that long.
Kimber Lanning, thank you so much for being open to this conversation. It's wonderful to catch up with you, and thanks for the privilege of being able to explore your whole journey.
Matt, thank you for always asking great questions.
Once again, my deepest thanks to Kimber Lanning, the founder and CEO of Local First Arizona. This episode was edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. Our executive producer is John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Ask me a question, share a comment, or let me know that you have a story to share. You can reach me at 602-688-2724 or Matt, M-A-T-T, at socialprosperity.us. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.